I still remember the smell. It wasn't a particular scent, just the kind of air that seems to settle in a room right before everything falls apart. It was a Sunday morning, early enough that the sun hadn't fully risen, but late enough that my life felt like it was in motion. My daughter, Caitlin, had called me from Phoenix. I always looked forward to her calls, especially when she was away for business, which she often was. It was her tone that morning, though, that struck me. "Dad, how are you holding up?" she asked, in that voice that always made my heart feel full, even when I knew she had other things on her mind. I smiled to myself as I sat back in my old recliner, the one I'd bought with the last of our savings years ago, just before Ellen died. The chair had a few worn spots, but it was still my spot. "Just finished dinner, sweetie," I replied, glancing at the clock. It was just past 7. I was about to watch the news. "How's everything on your end?" Her reply was warm, as it always was, but there was something in it today that felt a little off. It was the way she asked me about groceries, how I was eating, checking in with all the little things as though she were reading from a script. Maybe it was the kind of thing she said every time, but today it made me feel small. I brushed it off, the feeling that maybe I was just being paranoid, or maybe my age was getting the better of me. But then, just as she was about to hang up, I heard it. I wasn't supposed to hear it. Caitlin didn't know I could still hear her. The phone was still live when I heard her voice drop, the warmth in it turning into something cold, something calculating. "He's a burden," she said. "It's time for him to go to a nursing home." I froze, the words stabbing right through my chest. The world stopped spinning for a moment. I don't even know if I had breath in my lungs at that point. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. I stayed perfectly still, listening to her and Jeremy, the man she married, the one I had trusted, talk about me as if I were nothing more than a burden on their plans. The words kept echoing in my mind. A burden, time for me to go, and the worst part, they had already decided. The house. They were already talking about it like it was theirs to sell. I couldn't make sense of it. This was my house. This was my life. I'd built it for her, for Caitlin. When the conversation ended, I hung up, still numb, still staring at the empty air around me. I knew it would be a day or two before they came back from their trip, but the seed had been planted. They had already made plans. They were already packing up my life, tossing it aside like an old jacket they didn't need anymore. And that was the moment. That's when I knew. I wasn't going to let it go, not this time. I had spent the last 20 years, no, the last 30, working my fingers to the bone for my family, for Caitlin, for this house. I had given them everything, and now they were ready to walk away from me, ready to send me off like I didn't matter. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, someone you thought would never turn on you, then you know how it feels. It's not just anger, though there's plenty of that. It's not just sadness, though that, too, comes. It's a deep, gnawing sense of loss, a recognition that something inside you has died. I sat there, my hands gripping the armrests, the quiet of the house closing in on me. I thought about Ellen, my wife, gone now for almost 2 years. She had always warned me about being too generous, about giving too much too often. "Don't let them take everything from you," she used to say, in that soft way she had. "Take care of yourself, Roy. Don't forget that you matter too." I should have listened to her. But now there was something else I needed to do, something that had been bubbling under the surface for years. I had been the good father, the good husband, the good provider. I'd let Caitlin take what she wanted, let her play the dutiful daughter for the public, but behind closed doors, she had been slowly squeezing the life out of me. And today, after hearing those words, after feeling that sting, I knew it was time to stop. But you'll have to wait to find out how I did it. Trust me, it's a story you won't believe. If you want to know what happened next, you might want to stick around. It wasn't long after the call that I realized I had to act. Caitlin and Jeremy were returning in just a few days, and every minute leading up to that would be critical. I couldn't let them waltz in here, thinking they could take over my life like it was some piece of property they could sell off at will. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let them take everything from me. The house, my pride and joy, was more than just walls and a roof. It was a symbol of everything Ellen and I had built together. It was where we had raised Caitlin, where I had watched her grow up. Every corner of that house held memories, memories of her first steps, of her first day of school, of the Christmases we spent together, laughing and opening presents. It was our legacy, or at least it had been. The idea of selling the house hadn't just hit me out of nowhere. I had spent the past couple of years putting money into it, fixing things, upgrading, making sure that every part of it was something that Caitlin could one day call her own. I'd refinanced the mortgage more times than I could count, taking out loans, reworking payments, pushing my finances to the limit just to make sure they had everything they needed. I did it because I thought that was what fathers did. I thought that was what family meant. But now I was nothing but a stepping stone, a way for Caitlin and Jeremy to get ahead. I had let them take so much, and what did I get in return? They had stripped away my dignity, ignored my needs, and now they were planning to send me off to a nursing home without a second thought. A burden. That's what they called me. But I wasn't a burden. I was a man. And I would remind them of that, even if I had to go to the ends of the earth to do it. The first thing I did was go to the bank. I had kept all of my financials in order over the years, despite my growing frustration with how they had been used. I was meticulous, something I learned from Ellen. She always said, "Roy, you've got to keep track of everything. You never know when you'll need it." She was right. I needed it now. I sat down with the loan officer, a young woman named Kim, who didn't ask too many questions when I told her I wanted to cancel my automatic payments. It was the kind of decision I knew would have consequences, but I had made up my mind. I was tired of being the one who bailaid them out. I was tired of being the one who paid for their new cars, their fancy vacations, their designer clothes. Kim looked over the paperwork, tapping her pen thoughtfully on the desk. She glanced up at me, sensing something in the air, but she didn't ask. She was smart enough to know that some things were better left unsaid. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly after a long pause, "are you sure about this? This is a big decision." I stared at the papers in front of me, my hands shaking slightly. I could feel the weight of it, the weight of the years I had spent, the sacrifices I had made, all building up to this one moment. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Cancel the payments, effective immediately." The next few days were a blur. Caitlin and Jeremy would be back soon, and I needed to get everything in place before they arrived. I knew that once they saw the changes, once they realized what I had done, they wouldn't back down. They'd fight me, try to manipulate me, guilt me into giving them what they wanted. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. I spent the next few hours going over the house, mentally marking what I would need to do. There were repairs that needed to be finished, but I didn't have the time to fix everything. I didn't need to. This house wasn't going to be theirs to sell. I would make sure of that. The following morning, I drove down to the lawyer's office. Todd Fisher had been a friend of Ellen's, someone she had trusted, and I trusted him too. I had met with him a few years ago, just to make sure everything was in order, especially after Ellen had passed. We had discussed the legalities of property ownership, of wills, and the steps I needed to take if something ever happened to me. At the time, it had felt like a distant conversation, one I didn't want to think about. But now it seemed that the time had come. I sat in his office, the familiar smell of coffee in the air, as Todd leaned across the desk, his brow furrowed. He had always been a no-nonsense kind of guy, and I appreciated that. "Roy, I know you've been through a lot recently," he began, looking at me carefully. "But if you're going to do what I think you're planning to do, you need to be certain. This isn't something you can undo." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. There was no going back from this, but I wasn't scared anymore. I had been too passive for too long, and now I was done. I had let Caitlin and Jeremy take advantage of me, and I had let it go on for far too long. I wasn't going to let them strip away everything I had worked for, everything I had built. "I know," I said quietly. "I'm sure I've made my decision." Todd smiled slightly, a rare gesture. Then I'll make sure everything is in order. You won't have to worry about a thing." I left his office with a sense of relief, but it wasn't the kind of relief that comes from a weight being lifted. It was the kind of relief that comes from finally standing up for yourself, finally taking control. I had made my choice, and now there was no turning back. The next few days I spent preparing for their return. I didn't know exactly how Caitlin and Jeremy would react, but I knew one thing: they were going to be furious. They would try to use guilt, they would try to manipulate me into backing down. But this time I was ready. This time I wasn't going to be the weak one. As I sat in the quiet of my house, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had no idea how this was going to end, but I knew one thing for sure. It was going to be the last time I ever let anyone walk all over me. But I hadn't told you the full story yet. You might be surprised by how things unfold. If you want to know what happens next, you'll need to stay tuned. Believe me, it's not over yet. I knew the storm was coming, but there was something strangely calm about the quiet before it hit. My house felt emptier than usual in those last few days before Caitlin and Jeremy came back. It had always been just the two of us, me and Ellen. She had been the heart of the house, the one who made it feel like home, who filled it with laughter and love. Now there was just me. But even with Caitlin and Jeremy about to return, I didn't feel like I was truly alone anymore. Something had shifted inside me, and it wasn't just the house or the situation that felt different. It was me. I had taken back control. I spent those days slowly preparing for their arrival. There were things to finish around the house, repairs I had put off for years. I figured I might as well use the time to take care of the little things I had neglected. A broken window here, a faulty faucet there. It didn't matter anymore. The house wasn't theirs to fix or sell, and soon enough they'd see that. But the more I worked, the more I realized just how much I had done for Caitlin and Jeremy over the years. The amount of time and money I had poured into them, into their dreams, their comforts, their desires, was staggering. It wasn't just the mortgage, the renovations, or the gifts. It was the constant, never-ending support. I was the one who paid for Caitlin's college tuition when she couldn't get a loan. I was the one who helped her out when she and Jeremy struggled financially, no questions asked. And all that time, I had never once asked for anything in return. Not once. All I wanted was to be a part of their lives. And yet here I was, watching my daughter, the one I had raised, the one I had poured everything into, turn on me like it was nothing. It wasn't just that they had been using me. It was that they thought I was stupid enough to not realize it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Anger isn't something I often felt, at least not in such a deep, consuming way. But this was different. This wasn't just about money or possessions. This was about respect, or rather the lack of it. I'd been nothing but a tool for them, a means to an end, and they didn't even try to hide it. I had listened to Caitlin and Jeremy talk about how easy it would be to sell the house, how they could move into something bigger and better, something that fit their lifestyle without ever considering what that meant for me, for the life I had built. I spent that night staring out the window, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. And as the darkness outside deepened, I knew one thing for sure. The next time I saw Caitlin and Jeremy, everything would change. The man who had been willing to sacrifice anything for them was gone. In his place was a man who had finally realized his worth. I wasn't going to let them treat me like a doormat anymore. I wasn't going to sit quietly while they took what didn't belong to them. If they thought they could push me around, they were in for a rude awakening. I had been too passive for too long, but that ended now. When they arrived, it was exactly as I had expected. Caitlin walked through the door first, her face lighting up with the same false warmth she always used when she was about to ask for something. Behind her, Jeremy trailed in, his usual smug expression plastered across his face. They were in their late 30s, still young, still hungry, still believing the world owed them something. They didn't understand what it took to actually build a life, to put in the work, to make sacrifices. They only understood what they could take. "Dad," Caitlin exclaimed, her voice dripping with that false cheer I had come to dread. She rushed over to give me a hug, and for a split second I almost let myself believe she still cared. Almost. But then I remembered the conversation I had overheard. The cold, calculating words. "How was the trip?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "It was great," she replied, still holding on to that fake smile. "We missed you, though." I just nodded, watching her. My daughter, my only child, the person I had worked my entire life to give everything to. And now, here she was, pretending like nothing had changed. Nothing had happened. "Jeremy's been looking into some new investments," Caitlin continued, looking over at him. "We've been talking about possibly." I didn't let her finish. I wasn't interested in their plans anymore, not in the way they'd been scheming behind my back. I had no intention of letting them talk circles around me. "I've made some changes," I said, my voice firm. "I've canceled the automatic payments." Her smile faltered for a brief moment. She didn't expect that. Neither of them did. "What?" she asked, trying to mask her surprise with a nervous laugh. "Why would you do that, Dad?" "Because I'm not your bank anymore," I replied, standing up and walking past them. "I'm not going to keep paying for your lifestyle, for your plans, not when you've been treating me like a fool." Jeremy looked like he had just been slapped in the face. I could see the shock in his eyes, the disbelief that I was no longer going to be their punching bag. "You can't just do that, Roy," Jeremy said, trying to regain some composure. "This house is worth a lot. You can't just cancel the mortgage." "I can," I said, turning to face him, my gaze steady. "I just did." For a moment there was silence. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to handle the fact that I wasn't the same man they'd left behind. The man who would always give, always help, always sacrifice. Caitlin and Jeremy could see it now, the change in me. They could see the shift, the realization that I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore, and they didn't like it. "I don't think you understand what you've done," Caitlin said, her voice quieter now, the veneer of sweetness slipping. "We can't just fix this. You've ruined everything." "Everything?" I asked, stepping closer to her, keeping my voice calm, almost cold. "What exactly did I ruin, Caitlin? The life you've been planning for yourself. The one where I'm just a stepping stone." She didn't have an answer. Instead, she looked to Jeremy, her eyes filled with panic, and for the first time I saw something else, something real. Fear. They were scared, scared of losing everything, scared of losing their hold on me. But I wasn't going to let them use me anymore. "I'm done being used," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "And if you want to keep playing games, you can do it without me. This house, this life, it's mine. You won't be taking it from me." They both stood there frozen. They didn't know what to do, didn't know how to respond. They thought they had me. They thought they could push me around, make me feel guilty, but they were wrong. I wasn't the same man anymore, and that was the first step toward everything changing. But I'll tell you, what happened next was even more surprising than I could have imagined, but you'll have to wait to find out. The following days were strange, tense. Even though they tried to play it cool, Caitlin and Jeremy couldn't hide the fact that they were unnerved. I knew they didn't expect me to fight back like this. They had always assumed I would cave, always thought they could lean on me without consequence. But now they were faced with a man they didn't recognize. The man who had given everything for them was gone, and in his place was someone they hadn't bargained for. I wasn't going to lie, there was a part of me that enjoyed seeing them squirm just a little bit, the fear in their eyes, the discomfort in their voices when they tried to justify their plans, when they danced around the subject of the mortgage I just canceled. It felt good. It felt right. But at the same time, I knew this was only the beginning. They weren't going to let it go without a fight. They were going to try to push me again, to guilt me back into submission, and I had to be ready for that. The house had become the battlefield, and every little decision I made, every move I made was carefully calculated. I wasn't just protecting my property. I was protecting myself, my dignity, my future. I wasn't going to let them strip that away from me, not without a fight. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping on a cup of coffee, going over the papers I had gotten from Todd Fisher. I had been careful, everything was documented. The bank transfers, the mortgage payments, the renovations I had financed. Every penny I had spent, every sacrifice I had made. I wasn't just canceling payments. I was taking back control of what was mine, and if I needed to, I was going to use these documents to make sure they knew it. I could hear the faint murmur of Caitlin and Jeremy arguing upstairs. It wasn't the first time they had disagreed since they returned. I had seen them exchange words, sharp words, when they thought I wasn't paying attention. But now their arguments seemed more desperate, less like a couple in love and more like two people fighting to keep their facade intact. The cracks were starting to show, and it felt like everything was slipping away from them. They could feel it. It wasn't until dinner that night that I realized just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. They had tried to act normal, to sit down at the table and pretend like nothing had changed, but the tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jeremy had already started in on his usual charm offensive, talking about his latest business ventures, about the house they were planning to buy in Boulder, and how it was all going to work out perfectly once they figured out the mortgage situation here. But Caitlin wasn't having it. She kept her eyes on her plate, her mouth tight, her fingers fidgeting with the napkin. "Dad," she finally said, her voice low, almost hesitant, "we don't want this to turn into something bigger than it needs to be." I looked up from my plate, meeting her eyes. The false sweetness was gone. It was replaced by something colder, more calculating. "You need to understand something," she continued, her words careful, measured. "We're trying to do what's best for everyone, what's best for you. You know that, right?" I didn't respond immediately. I was watching her, really watching her. She was trying to pull me back into the web, trying to make me believe that everything was still the same, that she still cared. But I had seen through the mask. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. "What's best for me?" I asked, my voice steady, controlled. "Is that why you've been planning to sell my house behind my back? Is that what's best for me, Caitlin?" Her face flushed. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, she looked at Jeremy, her eyes pleading for him to step in. But Jeremy wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, Roy," Jeremy said, his voice tight with frustration. "You've been more than generous, but this isn't just about you anymore. This is about what's best for all of us." The audacity of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. What's best for all of us? What did that even mean? Since when had they stopped caring about what was best for me? Since when had I become the obstacle in their lives? I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a sharp scrape. "You want what's best for all of us. Then here's what's best. You can stop trying to sell my house. You can stop making decisions about my future. And you can leave me the hell alone." The room fell silent, the words hanging in the air like a threat. Caitlin's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find something to say, but nothing came out. Jeremy, on the other hand, looked like he was trying to figure out what to do next. His hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. He couldn't. He knew I wasn't bluffing. "You think you can just cancel everything and expect us to go along with it?" Caitlin finally found her voice. "You think you can just do whatever you want and we'll be fine with it?" I looked down at her, my eyes cold. "I think you've been taking advantage of me for too long, Caitlin, and I'm done being your punching bag." The words had hit harder than I meant them to. I saw her flinch, saw the hurt flash in her eyes, but I didn't care, not anymore. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't mean for it to hurt you." It was almost laughable. She was trying to play the victim now, trying to turn the tables, but I wasn't falling for it, not this time. "I think it's a little late for apologies," I said quietly. "The damage is done." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving Caitlin and Jeremy behind. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how far they would go to try to get what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine without a fight. The next few days were filled with tension. Caitlin and Jeremy tried to patch things up, tried to make nice, but I could see it in their eyes. They were angry, they were scared, and that made me feel something else. Something strange, something powerful. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for myself, and I wasn't going to lose. But what happened next? It's something you won't believe. You'll want to stay tuned, trust me, because I'm just getting started. The following days dragged on in a strange sort of standoff. Caitlin and Jeremy were relentless in their attempts to get me to see reason. They tried to charm me, to guilt-trip me, and when those tactics failed, they resorted to outright manipulation. But this time I was ready. The polite smiles, the fake apologies, none of it worked on me anymore. They thought they had control, that their manipulation would work, that they could convince me that this whole situation was just a temporary glitch in the system. But they didn't understand what was at stake. They didn't understand that I had already made up my mind. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for my own dignity, for my right to be treated like a man, not a pawn. I could feel the tension mounting with every passing day, as if the entire house was holding its breath. Caitlin and Jeremy weren't speaking to each other much. Jeremy had started coming home late, and Caitlin was becoming increasingly withdrawn, lost in her own thoughts. I could sense the divide between them. They weren't a united front anymore. They were desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. That Friday evening, when I was finishing up some paperwork in my study, I heard the familiar sound of Caitlin's voice, just outside the door. Her words were muffled, but there was no mistaking the tone. It was the voice of someone who was trying to keep it together, but failing. "I don't know what we're going to do, Jeremy," she said, the words thick with frustration. "He's not backing down. This is insane." "I don't care what he's doing," Jeremy's voice responded, low and seething. "We're not losing everything. If he thinks he can just pull this stunt and get away with it, he's got another thing coming." I leaned back in my chair, letting their words settle over me. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought they could scare me into submission like I had been in the past, but they didn't realize how far I was willing to go. I stood up and walked toward the door, listening carefully as Caitlin and Jeremy continued their heated discussion in the hallway. I knew I had to act quickly. If I let them see how much I knew, if I let them sense that I understood exactly what they were planning, I'd lose the element of surprise. So, I stayed silent for a few moments, letting them continue their conversation while I formulated my next move. "Dad's too stubborn," Caitlin muttered. "We'll have to make him see reason. He's not going to win this. I'll make sure of it." Her words sent a chill through me. Caitlin wasn't playing games anymore. She wasn't trying to convince me out of kindness. She was trying to break me. I took a deep breath, counting the seconds as I heard their footsteps moving closer to the study. This was it. I wasn't going to wait any longer. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. "Caitlin, Jeremy," I called out, my voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." They froze at the door, caught off guard. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before they finally opened the door, standing there, caught between their guilt and their anger. "Dad, Caitlin began, but I cut her off. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You don't get to speak first, not after everything you've done." They both looked at me, their faces flashing with surprise. They had never seen me like this before. They had never seen me angry, not like this. "I'm done playing nice," I continued, walking past them and sitting behind my desk. "You've been planning behind my back, using me as your personal ATM, taking my hard-earned money and acting like it's your right. But I'm not playing your game anymore. I've canceled the mortgage payments. I've taken back what's mine." Jeremy stepped forward, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You don't know what you're doing, Roy. This isn't just about you. This is about the future, our future." "The future," I echoed, leaning back in my chair, my eyes never leaving theirs. The future you've been planning for, where you get everything you want and I get nothing. The future where I'm just an old man with no say in his own life. Is that the future you're talking about? There was a beat of silence. No one spoke. Look, Roy, Caitlin said, her voice faltering, we just want to do what's best for everyone. This house is too much for you, it's too big. You need help, you need us. I shook my head slowly, disbelief settling over me. You think this house is too much for me. You think I'm incapable of making my own decisions. You think I need your charity. Jeremy scoffed, taking a step back. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for what's best for you. You're too old to be living alone. You're just too proud to see that. Pride. The word hit me like a slap. It was the one thing they used to make me feel small, to make me feel like I wasn't doing what was best for myself. The truth was, they wanted to control me. They didn't care what I wanted. They cared about what they could get from me. I don't need your pity, Jeremy, I said, standing up now, the adrenaline coursing through me. And I don't need you to decide what's best for me. What's best for me is keeping what I've worked for. What's best for me is not giving you the power to take what's mine. There was a long, charged silence as they processed what I'd said. Jeremy's expression darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. He was getting angry. I could see it in his eyes. Caitlin, on the other hand, looked like she was trying to piece together some sort of strategy in her mind, weighing her options. Well, we'll see about that, Jeremy finally said, his voice low and dangerous. You might think you've won, but you've only made things worse for yourself. We've got connections, people who will help us. The words hit me like a shot. Connections. It was the first time he'd mentioned anything about pulling strings, about using his social power. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of Caitlin, not of anyone. They could threaten me all they wanted. I had already made up my mind. I don't care who you know, Jeremy, I said, my voice cold. This is my house. This is my life, and you're not going to take it from me. The look on their faces, the shock, the realization that I wasn't backing down was worth everything. They didn't have a plan for me anymore. They thought they could control me, but I wasn't just some pawn in their game. I wasn't going to let them win. The next move would be mine. The tension in the house grew thicker by the hour. Caitlin and Jeremy were clearly rattled, but they didn't show it. Instead, they pretended to go about their business, acting like nothing had changed. But I knew. I could see it in their eyes, the way they'd glance at me when they thought I wasn't looking, the way they spoke to each other in hushed tones when they thought I couldn't hear. I wasn't sure what their next move was going to be, but I knew it wouldn't be long before they made a play. I had hit them hard with my decision to cancel the mortgage payments, and they were already scheming ways to take control of the situation. They thought they could manipulate me, push me into a corner where I'd cave. But they didn't understand one thing. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of them. And I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I spent the next couple of days sticking to my routine. I went about my business like I always had, maintaining the house, fixing small things that needed attention, staying busy to keep my mind off of the mess that was slowly unfolding. But deep down, I knew that they were preparing for war, and they weren't going to fight fair. That evening, I received a call from Todd Fisher. It wasn't unusual for him to check in on me from time to time, especially after the cancellation of the mortgage payments. I had explained to him that things were getting complicated, and he had been more than willing to lend his expertise in the situation. But this call was different. This one carried an undercurrent of urgency I hadn't expected. Roy, Todd's voice was lower than usual, as if he was trying to keep something quiet. I think it's time we talk about some other options. I've been hearing some things, and I think you should be prepared. Prepared for what? I immediately sat up straighter, my hand instinctively gripping the armrest of my chair. I've heard from a few people. Connections, as your son-in-law would put it, Todd continued. That Caitlin and Jeremy are talking to some people, trying to figure out how they can force you into a position where you'll have to sell. They're looking at every option they can. Even if they can't convince you to sell the house, they're not above playing dirty to get what they want. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Of course they were. They were determined to get their hands on the house, and if that meant going to any length to make it happen, then they would. I wasn't naive enough to think that they would stop at a canceled mortgage. They had already proven that they would do whatever it took to manipulate me. But hearing Todd confirm it made it feel real, like the walls were closing in. "What kind of options?" I asked, my voice tight, trying to steady myself. "Threats," Todd said bluntly. "They're talking about accusing you of being mentally unfit. They might even try to get a conservatorship or something like that, claiming you can't make your own decisions. They're looking into ways to get control of your assets." I stood up, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on me. A conservatorship. That was the last thing I ever expected them to try. I had spent my life taking care of my family, working hard for what I had, and now they wanted to take that from me, just like that. Just because they didn't like the fact that I was standing up for myself. I swallowed hard, trying to process everything Todd had just said. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice suddenly feeling small. The powerlessness I had been trying to escape from was creeping back in, despite my best efforts. "You need to be ready," Todd replied, his tone serious. "I can't make their moves for them, but I can help you protect yourself. I've been working on some legal options in case they try anything drastic. If they want to play dirty, we can show that you're fully capable of making your own decisions. But it's going to be a fight, Roy. You need to be prepared for that." The words hung in the air. I knew Todd was right. I had to be ready for whatever they threw at me. But there was no way I was going to let them win. I had been on the receiving end of their manipulation for too long. I had let them take everything I had built, but not anymore. Not now. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice steady now. "Let's do this." Todd gave me some final instructions about gathering documents, preparing evidence, and making sure I had everything in order in case Caitlin and Jeremy followed through on their plans. As we hung up, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me. The fight wasn't over yet, but I wasn't going to let them take what was mine without a hell of a fight. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I spent hours in my study, going through old documents, tax records, mortgage papers, everything I could find that would show my capability to manage my own life. Todd had helped me set up a legal defense in case Caitlin and Jeremy made their move, but I knew I needed to be thorough. If they thought they could pull one over on me, they were gravely mistaken. I wasn't just protecting my house anymore. I was protecting my life. But Caitlin and Jeremy weren't done yet. No matter how much preparation I did, I knew they wouldn't back down without trying to hit me where it hurt. And it wasn't until later that week when their true plan came to light. I didn't expect it to come from an email, but there it was, sitting in my inbox, looking innocent enough at first. I almost deleted it, thinking it was just more spam. But then I saw the name, Attorney Mark Johnson. That's when I knew things were about to get much worse. I opened the email. The subject line made my stomach drop: legal notice, conservatorship proceedings. It was happening. The fight I had been bracing for was no longer just a fight for my property. It was a fight for my freedom. The email sat there on my screen, its subject line like a ticking clock counting down to the inevitable. Legal notice, conservatorship proceedings. The words felt like a slap, each one ringing louder than the last. I stared at it for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to breathe. The fight I had been preparing for, the battle I thought I was already in, had just escalated to a whole new level. They weren't just trying to take the house anymore. They were trying to strip me of my very autonomy. I clicked open the email, my hands shaking as I did. The message was cold, calculated, and formal, exactly what I would expect from Caitlin and Jeremy's lawyer. It outlined their intentions to file for a conservatorship, claiming that I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. They were accusing me of being incapable of making sound decisions, of being too old, too forgetful, too stubborn to handle my own life. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about the mortgage payments or the property they wanted to seize. It was about control. They wanted to take everything from me. My dignity, my rights, my life. The email instructed me to contact their lawyer, Mark Johnson, within 10 days to discuss a potential settlement. A settlement. They didn't even have the decency to call it what it was, a takeover. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning around me. For a moment, everything felt surreal. I couldn't believe it. I had expected them to push me, to manipulate me, to threaten me. But I never thought they would go this far. A conservatorship wasn't something you just dismissed. It was a legal process that would strip me of my rights, turn me into a puppet, with Caitlin and Jeremy pulling the strings. I rubbed my temples, trying to clear my thoughts. I wasn't just going to roll over. I couldn't. But I knew I needed to act fast. I couldn't let them catch me off guard. I had been preparing for a fight, but this was different. This was no longer about them simply taking advantage of me. This was about taking my entire life from me. I picked up the phone and dialed Todd Fisher's number. He picked up on the third ring. "Roy," he said, his voice steady, "I figured you'd be calling soon. You've got the email." I didn't answer right away, my eyes still glued to the screen. "Yeah, I've got it." "They're serious," Todd continued, his tone a little more urgent now. "This is their move. They've gone through with it. They've already filed the papers to start the process." "Can they do this?" I asked, the words barely above a whisper. "Can they just take over my life like that?" Todd paused before answering, his voice calm but laced with an edge of warning. "Legally, yes. It's not an easy process, but they've got enough to get it started. If they can prove you're mentally unfit, if they can convince a judge that you can't manage your affairs, they'll be granted conservatorship. And that means they control everything." I closed my eyes, trying to process the weight of his words. "So they can just take everything, my house, my money, my decisions." "That's right," Todd said, his voice hardening. "They're not just after the house anymore. They're after control, and they're going to use whatever they can to get it." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. What do I do? "You fight," Todd said, his tone firm. "We've got a few options, but the first thing we need to do is build a case. We need to prove that you're still in full control of your faculties. I'll help you gather everything we need, but we've got to move fast." I sat there for a long time after hanging up, staring at the email again, replaying Todd's words in my head. The reality of the situation was setting in. This wasn't just a legal battle. This wasn't just a matter of property or money. This was about something much deeper. This was about my rights. And I wasn't going to let them take those from me. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls and legal documents. Todd and I worked together, gathering everything we could to prove that I was still in control of my life. Bank statements, medical records, anything that would show I had the mental and physical capacity to manage my affairs. I had to make sure there was no question about it. But despite my preparations, there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind, something I couldn't shake. Caitlin and Jeremy weren't just going to give up. I knew that. I knew they wouldn't back down just because I had a lawyer. They were determined, and that kind of determination is dangerous. I had no doubt they were planning their next move, whatever it was. I woke up early one morning, unable to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what they might do next. As I sat in the quiet of the house, I heard the sound of the front door opening. It was Caitlin and Jeremy, back from one of their late-night trips, talking in low voices as they walked through the house. They didn't realize I was awake yet. I strained to listen, my heart pounding in my chest. "We can't just let him win this." Jeremy's voice was low, filled with frustration. "He's already taken away the house. If we don't do something, he's going to ruin everything." Caitlin's voice was softer but still sharp. "We'll find a way. I'll figure it out. We can't let him have control over the property. I'll go to the lawyer and see if there's another way we can force him out." I heard the door to the study open and the sound of papers rustling. They were going through my things again, searching for something they could use against me. I felt the rage rise inside me, but I held it in check. I had to think. I had to stay calm. The realization hit me like a freight train. They were desperate. They didn't have all the answers. They were looking for a way to get around the legal battle, and that meant they would stop at nothing to break me. I wasn't going to let them win, not this time. The game had changed, but I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't going down without a fight. But what would they do now? The next move was on them, and it would be their last. The following week felt like a never-ending storm. I could feel the tension between Caitlin and Jeremy building to a boiling point. The house, which had once been a symbol of family and comfort, now felt like a battleground. Every inch of it seemed filled with the weight of our unspoken animosity, each room echoing with the unresolved conflict. It wasn't just the house anymore, it was everything. Their desperation to control me, to force me into a position where they could take what I had left, had become suffocating. But despite their plans, despite their maneuvering, I was still standing, and I wasn't going to let them break me. Not now, not after everything. I knew they were growing more frustrated. They could see that I wasn't giving in. Caitlin had become increasingly cold, her sweet facade cracking more and more with each passing day. Jeremy, on the other hand, was just angry, lashing out when things didn't go his way, trying to manipulate me with veiled threats disguised as concern. But it wasn't working. They couldn't force me into their mold anymore. I wasn't the man I had been a year ago. I had made my choice, and I was willing to see this through to the end. That evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at the stack of documents Todd had helped me gather. I was deep in thought, trying to figure out what my next move should be, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I turned just as Caitlin entered the room, her face hard and unreadable. She was no longer pretending that everything was fine. "We need to talk," she said, her tone flat. I didn't respond immediately, just watched her carefully. I had no idea what she wanted now, but I knew it wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. It was the same look I had seen in her eyes when we had that conversation about the house months ago, determined, but with a hint of panic. She knew she was losing control. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she continued, her voice growing more tense, "but this whole thing with the mortgage payments and the conservatorship, it's not going to work. You're not going to win, Dad." I didn't say anything. I just waited, letting the silence hang between us. It was a rare thing, that silence. Normally, I would have filled it with words, anything to keep the peace, anything to avoid conflict. But not now. Now I was letting her feel the weight of her own words, letting her see the resolve in my eyes. "I'm not a fool, Caitlin," I said quietly. "I know what you've been trying to do. You've been trying to force me into submission, trying to manipulate me into selling everything I've worked for. But it's not going to happen. You're not going to take this from me." Her eyes flickered with anger, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me, like she was weighing her next words carefully. "You're not thinking straight," she said after a long pause, her voice tinged with frustration. "You've been acting like this is some game, but it's not. This is our future, too. We've done everything we can for you, and you're throwing it all away for what? A house." It was the same line she'd used a dozen times before, how they were doing everything for me, how they were trying to help. But this time, something in me snapped. The rage I had been holding back for so long surged to the surface. This wasn't about them trying to help. This was about them taking everything from me and twisting it into something that suited their needs. "I didn't ask for your help," I said, standing up now, my voice sharp. "I didn't ask for you to take control of my life. I didn't ask you to turn me into a pawn in your little power play. I don't need your charity, Caitlin, and I don't need your manipulation." Her face turned red with anger, but instead of shouting, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes as if trying to collect herself. When she opened them again, I saw something else, something darker. "You think you can just walk away from this?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just cancel everything, refuse to let us help, and everything will be fine?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "You're wrong," she said, her words deliberate. "You're not as strong as you think you are, Roy. You've been playing a dangerous game and now you're going to lose." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the first time she had really threatened me directly. The tone in her voice told me she wasn't bluffing. She was willing to do whatever it took to get her way, no matter the cost. I had no doubt she was capable of anything at this point. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady but filled with conviction. "This is my house, my life. You're not going to control it anymore. You're not going to get away with it." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a warning, and I could see in her eyes that she meant it, but there was no fear in me anymore. I had already made my decision. I was done being a victim in this family. I wasn't going to back down, no matter what they threw at me. She turned to leave, her back stiff, but just before she reached the door, she stopped and turned around. "You'll see," she said softly, almost too quietly for me to hear. "I'm doing this for you. You don't even realize what's at stake." And with that, she walked out, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the weight of her words hanging in the air. I didn't know exactly what she meant by that, but I knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to stop. Neither of them was going to stop until they had what they wanted. They'd push and push until they broke me. But I wasn't going to break, not this time. And then it hit me what she had said before about what's at stake. It wasn't just the house, was it? There was something else, something much bigger. I had to find out what it was, because once I did, I would finally understand their endgame. The following days were a blur, a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and preparations. I wasn't the kind of man who had ever been afraid of a fight, but this was different. Caitlin and Jeremy weren't just after my property anymore. They were after my life. And I could see it now, the lengths they were willing to go to, the way they were willing to tear everything apart to get what they wanted. After that conversation with Caitlin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her words had haunted me. "You don't even realize what's at stake." What was she talking about? What had I missed? I spent every moment I could focusing on the legal side of things, meeting with Todd, making sure that my defense was airtight. We gathered documents, compiled evidence, and prepared for the fight that was sure to come. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for my freedom, my autonomy, and my dignity. But still, something gnawed at me. Something in Caitlin's voice, in the way she had looked at me, made me wonder if there was more to this than I realized. It wasn't until I was going through some old files in the study that I found it. A small, inconspicuous envelope, hidden in the back of a drawer I hadn't touched in years. It was addressed to Caitlin, written in Ellen's familiar handwriting. My heart sank as I pulled it out, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I opened the envelope carefully, as if afraid that something would spill out, something I wasn't meant to see. Inside was a letter, Ellen's letter. It was short, just a few paragraphs, but it was enough to make everything fall into place. "My dearest Caitlin," the letter began, "I know that you will have questions when you read this, but please understand that I have made my decisions with love and care. There is something about your father's health that I have always kept private, something I never wanted to burden you with. But now, I must tell you, in case the time comes when I am no longer here. Your father has been living with a diagnosis that could affect his mental clarity in the future. He has a rare condition, one that could make him vulnerable, one that could make him easy to manipulate, to misinterpret. I have kept it hidden for as long as possible, but I fear it may come to light one day. And when that happens, I need you to remember that this is not your fault. You will be the one to take care of him when that time comes. You will need to protect him for both of your sakes." The letter went on. outlining the steps Ellen had taken to ensure that I was cared for in the event of a decline, including setting up a small trust for my medical expenses and a few other details. But the most chilling part was what she had written about my condition. Ellen had known. She had known something I hadn't been able to see. The letter ended with a final plea. "I trust you, Caitlin. I know you will do what's best for him. Please don't let anyone take advantage of him. Please protect him, even from himself if necessary." As I sat there holding the letter, the reality of it all sank in. Caitlin had known about my condition. She had known that I was at risk of losing my faculties, of becoming someone vulnerable. And now I realized, this whole time they hadn't been trying to help me. They hadn't been trying to care for me. They had been trying to control me, to seize what was mine before the inevitable happened. They were trying to take advantage of my diagnosis, of something that might never even happen. The fear that had been lingering in the back of my mind now became something real. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't about money or power. It was about Caitlin's plan all along, her plan to use my condition to get what she wanted, to take away everything I had left before it was too late. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let her turn me into something I wasn't, something I didn't want to be. She had used her knowledge of my condition against me, turning it into a weapon. But I wasn't going to be a victim, not anymore. I stood up, the letter clenched tightly in my hand, and walked to the window. The weight of it all felt unbearable, but I knew there was no turning back now. The fight was no longer about the house, the money, or the property. It was about my right to live my life on my terms. It was about my right to control my own destiny. That night I called Todd again. I couldn't waste any more time. "Todd," I said as soon as he picked up, "I need you to start preparing for something else. I've found out what they're really after, and it's not just the house. We need to take action, and we need to take it now." Todd's voice was cautious. "What do you mean?" "They're trying to use my health against me," I said, my voice tight with anger. "They're trying to manipulate the system, to use my diagnosis to take control of my life. They've known about it for years, and now they're ready to use it to destroy me." Todd paused, clearly processing what I had just said. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "This isn't just about money anymore. They're after my freedom, and I'm not going to let them win." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then Todd's voice came back, calm and steady. "All right, we'll move fast. I'll start preparing the necessary paperwork and we'll build our case. You need to make sure they can't use this against you." I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the decision settle on me. It was all out in the open now. Caitlin and Jeremy had shown their hand, and I wasn't about to let them get away with it. They had underestimated me just like they always had. They thought I was weak, that I could be controlled. But I had a secret weapon now, the truth. And the truth was going to set me free. But just as I was about to sit down and start planning my next move, I heard a knock at the door. It was a knock I wasn't expecting. And it was the beginning of the end. The knock on the door shattered the stillness of the house. For a moment I just stood there, staring at the door. The house felt suffocating, each breath harder to take. Caitlin and Jeremy had pushed me to my breaking point, but I knew this was the moment, the final test. Whatever was coming next would determine everything. I walked slowly to the door, the letter from Ellen still clenched in my hand, the weight of her words pressing on my chest. I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. When I opened the door, I was met with an unexpected sight. It was not Caitlin or Jeremy standing on the other side, but a man I didn't recognize. His suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable. He wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, holding a clipboard and a stack of papers. I immediately felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Mr. Hayes," the man asked, his voice professional but with a slight edge of authority, "we've been sent by the court." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. "Sent by the court," I repeated, my voice a little shaky despite myself. He nodded. We're here to serve you with a legal order for a mental competency evaluation. Your daughter, Caitlin Hayes, has filed a petition with the court to request a conservatorship over your affairs. She's concerned about your ability to make decisions for yourself." I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just stood there staring at him. I felt like the world had tilted beneath me, the ground shifting underfoot. The woman handed me the clipboard with the papers, her eyes studying me like I was a specimen. "You're required to sign this to acknowledge receipt of the petition. The court will schedule an evaluation, and you'll be given a chance to defend your capacity in front of a judge." I took the papers from her hand, my fingers trembling as I glanced over the contents. The words jumped out at me: conservatorship, mental incompetence, inability to manage finances. Caitlin had done it. She had made her move, and now the courts were involved. For the first time, I felt like I was losing control of everything. The house, my finances, my life, it all seemed to be slipping through my fingers, but I wasn't going to give up. Not now. I took a deep breath, forcing the anger back down. "I'll sign it," I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "But make no mistake, I will fight this." The man didn't respond, merely nodding as he took the papers back. "As you wish. The court will be in touch with you regarding the evaluation." He turned to leave, the woman following behind him without a word. They disappeared down the driveway, leaving me standing in the doorway, still processing what had just happened. They were trying to take everything. I knew it now without a doubt. Caitlin and Jeremy weren't just interested in the house. They wanted my entire life, my independence. They were using my diagnosis, something that could be a long way off or something that might never happen, and using it against me. I stood there for a long moment, the papers in my hand feeling like a weight too heavy to bear. The anger, the betrayal, it all welled up inside me. But now it was no longer just about their betrayal. It was about my fight for the truth. I had to protect my dignity, my rights. I couldn't let them win. The next few days were a blur of preparations. I met with Todd again, discussing the next steps. We had a plan in place to challenge the conservatorship, but it was going to be difficult. The system wasn't on my side. Caitlin and Jeremy had the law on their side, and they had already begun to make their case, painting me as unfit. But Todd was confident that we could fight it. We would show the court that I was still in control of my faculties, that I was still capable of making my own decisions. But the pressure was mounting. I could feel the walls closing in on me. Every time I saw Caitlin and Jeremy, I saw the cold calculation in their eyes, the way they thought they had already won. They were playing a dangerous game, but I was ready to beat them at their own game. And then, just as I was preparing for the battle in court, Caitlin made a move I didn't see coming. It was the morning of the evaluation. I had prepared myself for the worst, an interview with a court-appointed psychologist, questions about my mental state, questions about my ability to care for myself. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't let Caitlin win. As I was walking out the door, Caitlin appeared on the porch. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of emotionless calm. She stepped forward, blocking my path. "Dad, I know this isn't easy," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "But I'm doing this because I love you. I'm doing this to protect you. I don't want to see you make a mistake that'll cost you everything." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the final act in the play she had been orchestrating. I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to manipulate me into backing down, to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. "I don't need you to protect me," I said quietly, my voice firm. "I don't need you to control my life. I've spent years working for what I have. I'm not going to let you take that from me. Not now, not ever." Her eyes flickered with something that almost looked like regret, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold determination. "You don't get it, do you? You're not in control anymore. You never were." For a brief moment, I almost felt a pang of doubt, but then I remembered everything. The house, my life, my autonomy. And most importantly, I remembered Ellen's letter. I remembered her final words to Caitlin, urging her to protect me but not to manipulate me. She had trusted Caitlin, but I wasn't so sure anymore. "I don't care what you think," I said, taking a step back. "This isn't about you or Jeremy, it's about me, and I won't let you take what's mine, not without a fight." With that, I walked past her, the air between us thick with the unspoken tension. I wasn't sure what was going to happen in the coming days. I didn't know how the court would rule. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going down without a fight. I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting for everything I had left. My freedom, my dignity, my right to live my life as I saw fit. And no one, not even Caitlin, was going to take that from me.